Now I'm gonna open it for questions. I see lots of hands, and thank you for your patience. Thank you for listening, and the floor is open. Susan, I would like to give you the first go.
Yeah, that way everybody can see everybody. Oh, I see there's a lot of comments. Hey, I was thinking a lot about what you were presenting in terms of orienting our heart, and I felt like that's like a first step for me. Like that's like the first step, like shifting my attention to thinking about the other person. Um, I just for me, it needs to go further in terms of me really having the right heart toward other people. So like I've mentioned before in this group, like I try to pray as often as I remember to to ask God to show me how to love people the way he loves them. So it's not so much that I'm shifting to think about them, but I also want to know, like, really not just, it's not just a feeling like I feel like I love somebody, it's not just having a good feeling toward, but like the definition that Paul gives about love, like it does not seek its own interests. But there's so much more to it than just thinking of putting somebody and their needs first. But though while you were talking about that, and then you talked about how God is the perfect example of that love. um, I know this is corny because people use this example a lot in churches, but um, that image of Jesus on the cross, that he opened his arms out wide. Like, the question's always like, how much does God love you? This much. And Jesus proved it by spreading out his arms wide. But I think about that because there's this vulnerability in that action of opening yourself up like that what came to my mind was that we have to also be willing to have this type of a vulnerability toward other people. It's not just like, oh, there's a poor person there, I'm going to give them a sandwich and walk away. Now I've done my duty, I checked off the box, I've loved them, and shown them love. I mean, that's important that we feed people that are hungry, for instance. But there's just so much more to this idea of like just giving up yourself, whatever that takes, to put others first or to try to show them the love of God. And we've seen it in many occasions that are just astonishing, where people have just thrown their arms around someone that has murdered their child and said, I forgive you. These powerful examples of love that are absolutely impossible for us in our human frailty and our human limitations to actually really express and feel that type of love. We can't do it without God's spirit. So what we're praying for is for God to show us how to love the way he loves, which is so transcendent to the way we see love or the way we feel about love. Even in our most deepest love that we feel for another person, it just doesn't even compare with the type of love that God has. So I feel like we could take it even further, like orient our hearts to caring about the welfare for others, and then also just praying for God to just lead us to love them the way he loves them, in this vulnerable, sacrificial way um, that just takes it even deeper. So I really appreciate all this. It is something that, we just have to keep thinking and pondering and restructuring and re-examining, because we are so limited and our love is so puny compared to God's love. So we're supposed to be like him. So I appreciate that.
Thanks, Susan. And I absolutely agree with the point you made, where you know, the seed is there, but there is a clear superiority in in what would I call quality between human love and divine love. And what I mean by that is with the way that, just for me, the clarity in this reframing definition came in, it's not foolproof, but it's the same element that is both in God and in us, to desire the good of another. But where we need to even lean on the Lord more in expressing that is the fact that because we are tainted in even our judgment and ability to know what is good, sometimes we can do actions that are, yes, from a good place, but it's not really good. Maybe at time. So love, that fundamental attribute doesn't mean that it always acts in the same way, right? Just like I was using the analogy, like electricity, in a lamp, it would produce light, but in a heater, it would produce heat, right? In a speaker, it would produce sound. In the same way, in that core element, when we have it, it can sometimes appear as tough love, where you withhold or you express discipline in order for a good to come out for that person. So, like a drug addict who comes asking for, money to buy drugs. Love in that moment would say, no, we're not going to give this person the money. It's different from saying someone who genuinely needs a meal, and at that moment, love expresses as giving, to their needs. But the higher thing where the God factor comes in, and to your point, is the fact that God sees transcendently beyond our ability. And in a moment of tension or need, by depending on the Lord to show us how to rightly love, he gives us directives on what to do that may be beyond what we thought about. So, yeah, no, I totally agree with you. Like we can probe deeper and deeper. Thank you. Um, I think I saw Inti was second, right? So, Inti, please go ahead.
Hey, hey. I feel like we can all relate to this teaching because we've just, being Jesus followers, you kind of have to be exposed to the notion of love, and a lot of times it's, people look to like agape and trying to define it in their time how they were using it and stuff. The way I kind of define love is very similar. Is love is the intent and action of doing good to someone and is not about myself. Um, and sometimes when I do this, and it's the same thing as what you're saying, just in different words, I think. Um, when I uh, when I love on others, a lot of times in the moment, it'll be in real time, and there'll be like maybe goals or something like, oh, this would be really cool if they were benefited this way, or if they were helped this way, or whatever it is. But other times, more importantly, um, it's really got to be without the outcome. It can't be based on outcomes. When like here at my grandparents, where I was taking care of my grandmother while my grandfather was in the hospital, and my grandmother has short-term memory loss, and sometimes she was very rude, and kind of mean, but I had to choose to not be outcome dependent, if that makes sense. And had to just love on her, and so it's actually been a very big growing moment for me, just experiencing that, loving without expecting anything back, loving knowing it can backfire, and trying to be a peacemaker by bringing peace into situations, and whatnot. But I was just wondering because, like, with love being not just our actions but our intent, love being the intent and action of doing good towards another. I have a question on that word "good" means, and I, I, I have this is my question because, like, I know for years I've struggled with it, but you kind of made me think of something. Maybe it can become more second nature to us by the more we ponder on how God would treat us if we were in that person's shoes. Like God, like I see God, and I don't, I feel like it's not. I feel like it could be more second nature. Is really what I should say, for how He's provided for me, how he's shown me interest in my life through relationships, like Donna talked about before the meeting this morning. How that's one of the best things that God has given us, that we can have um, personal relationships with people, and how God blesses us in those ways. And so I'm just curious as to what your thoughts are on like going in more depth about that word good, because having the heart and actions of doing good towards others, sometimes I view it as, it helps brainstorming in the moment, thinking about the outcome and trying to help people in their outcomes, or but I feel like maybe it could become more second nature as to what good actually is towards people, by seeing he would how he is, what, not just what he has done with us, but how he would want for other people, and maybe how God has provided for them, kept them healthy, um, those kinds of things.
Yeah, good comments and question, NT. I would say that when we incline our hearts to seek good and the concept of good, um, the way that I'm thinking about it is that there are many layers to what we call good. There is the first, like, common universal good, you know, health, food, um, resources, clothing, and all that, right? That it's universally understood as this is a good, this is a positive. But then, just like human relationships are deeper and more complex, there are certain layers of good where it starts becoming complicated. What I mean by that is a good that withholds in the moment for a better benefit later, right? So in a relational dynamic where, let's say, farmer is is in a period of drought and wants to, plant so that they would have food at the end of the year, they might ration out. So to someone just looking at it in plain terms, it might look like, oh, we're having less food right now. But the farmer is thinking ahead, where at this point, he's now operating on what I'll call level two good, where I restrict now for the benefit of abundance later. So all I'm trying to say is, to your question, what do we mean by good? There are many layers and levels to it. And there's some that it's at base level, any human, you're not a Christian, you don't have to be religious. It's innately wired into us. And the concept of love, when we can think about, oh, what, as I relate with people or things, I want to, desire their good. It's universally programmed into us. But there are certain layers of kind of interaction where it starts getting complicated. Furthermore, it's been tainted by sin and the tendency for other desires to start corrupting how we think. And that's where linking up with God and learning his ways and depending on him to teach us what good means in higher order of functioning comes into play. And he now might, help us see, in this case, the good that I want is this. It's not about you giving, it's about you praying. It's not you about responding, it's about you just taking this quietly because I'm working something. And so again, I think I like that analogy of electricity. It is, you can't see it, but you can directly, but you can see its effect. Love, the core definition, when our hearts are oriented, God can show us what the expression should be in any given time. And it's not always about, it's not even necessarily about the feedback we get. It's about, if that desire is there, what should it produce in that moment? Some we can figure out rationally, and others, it's in dependence on Him to know what is the right application. Thank you.
Thanks, George.
Uh, yes. Um, let's see, who was next? Was it Paul or? Okay, Paul, please go ahead. And then I think Samuel, and then Sergio, then Stephen Phyllis.
First of all, Josh, thank you very much for that teaching. I thought that was very, very helpful. I really like the definition, and I can see how that fits in those many places. Um, and I'll be using that definition myself going forward because I think it's straightforward to remember, and definitely cuts much confusion with so many other definitions that you see of the secular and Christian definitions. So I'm really grateful for that. I think that's going to be really, really helpful for going forward. Um, so yeah, great. I do agree with what was mentioned earlier about the unconditionality of it and so on that Rishemik mentioned. But I think that almost should go without saying anyway, because it's, you know, in what way is love conditional? You know, I think that's the, God's love is unconditional, and if that's what we are trying to emulate, then we shouldn't have conditions on our love either. But George, I was also disappointed. I actually was. And that's because you started off the presentation talking about the background and the lessons from the trials that you'd had. And I think some of these really tie into what you've talked about here as well. Um, I mean, for example, if we are to love people unconditionally and we have to want their good and so on, yeah, we could force ourselves to do that because we're doing it because we love God. And you know what? That's one reason to do it. And I think it's an important reason to do it because we are commanded to. So whether you like it or not, do it. But we can also do it from a much better place, as was mentioned there, from a higher level, from a more godlike level. And and I think what you talked about earlier when you talked about wisdom, the wisdom, the perspective from above, I think that's really important because that will help us to understand why we should do it. So we can ask for that wisdom and actually better know why that's the right thing to do in that. And that should hopefully make it easier for us knowing that. I don't believe that anybody truly wants anyone else not to go to the kingdom. You know, the sinners are converted. I'm one of those, and I'm glad to be on that path now. And I really do wish that for everyone, even the person that I don't like in the moment. I wouldn't wish damnation on anyone like that. We can all change. God's power is great. So that's kind of a thing. That's a wisdom. I think that's from above.
Yeah.
And there are so many others in the moment relating to the situation and the person and what have you. So that's one part. I also thought the other part that you talked about, what it means to truly know, where you talked about the progressive path of discovery, alignment and obedience. That's the first step of loving another person. We do it out of obedience, aligning with that, agreeing with that, and starting to do it, and then imitating that and becoming that, and then representing. And when we have that wisdom and have been doing that imitation and get to the point of representing God as Jesus did with love, then we know God because we know that that's the love and the reasons behind being able to love in those moments. And that is the love from God. Um, so I think so. I was disappointed that didn't get tied in more. I think you missed a trick there, but hopefully me bringing us back to that a little bit is helpful. So thank you very much for that, George. I loved it, and I will be using that definition going forward because it really is helpful. So thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And yes, agree and accept your feedback. And yeah, like there is just so much, and I was like, wow, I'm already getting long in, this presentation as I was preparing the slides, but to tie that more effectively. And I would say that, you know, um, the Lord started teaching me this earlier in the year. And I have been just trying to work on that in obeying it personally before for talking about it. And I noticed that there were times where in heated moments of disagreement or pain, um, getting myself to say, Lord, I ask you to help me to orient my heart to the good of this person has just had a profound, like pouring cold water on a heated situation. Or times where I'm inconvenienced and interrupted, and I want to like be grumpy and realizing, am I orienting my heart for the good of this person? And, instantly, like when if previously to say, do I love this person? Like, nope, move on. Like it means really, like for me, the desperation in going through this whole journey was like, I want to reliably be able to, uh, how do I say, uh, or guard my heart, like, control my heart towards obeying God and living out what He's asking me to. And so this kind of has been helping me. And so, like, even praying when I've been deeply wounded, it's helped me to shift focus and say, Lord, and rightly to what you're saying, asking for wisdom from above. I'm really hurt. I'm not desiring right now. I can't get myself to desire the good of this person. But please help me see your perspective. And because I love you, because I am, desiring to please you and I want to align with you. I choose your value towards this person. Like it's almost like like a whiteboard where sometimes like there's been an area of deep hurt where I've not been able to personally get myself there. But when I remember that I love God, I say, okay, Father, I love you. I mean this genuinely. And so I'm aligning with your value towards this. And it's helped me through that. So thank you for that point. Okay, Samuel.
Yes. Thank you, George. This was a great teaching. I know that it's funny because so I see both in yourself and in me right now, happening something that we talked about in a conversation where whenever we want to figure something out, we get all the facts on the table and then we put them together like a puzzle piece. And I'm sure that's what you did with love in this whole past 12 months. And now we can see the fruit of that, and it's awesome. And then for me, what's happening right now is there's a lot of different like little dots of knowledge in my mind that's coming up. And I kind of want to present them all, but I'm not sure that I will because not all of them are exactly going in the same direction as the direction that you're going. So I'm just gonna talk and then let me see. I'll figure out when to stop. um, man, love is such there's like you said, everyone's been pointing to this and saying this. There's so much to it, and it's very, in a sense, a complex topic. It's hard to summarize it in just like one word, right, or something like that. And it reminds me of whenever I taught on the fear of God. I think this was last year when I was still part of my, oh, yeah, previous church or whatever. The fear of God is one of those things that it's really difficult to define. You can use a lot of things to describe it, but it's really difficult to define. And so I gave an example about how, um, like the word, I think I have it here in Spanish, disappointed. If you want to define disappointed, you might use other words to describe it. And it's not that disappointment is these three other things, but it's like this weird combination of these things. And so I put like mad, sad, and discontent. You can think of being disappointed as not those three things individually or even together, but there's like a weird mixture of those things. And I think that's what we're really, a lot of the nuances that people are bringing, that's what we're doing. It's we're It's like trying to draw a perfect circle. Like the more you zoom in, you just find that it's lines that are, like going in like a certain direction. It's never like a perfect circle, right? So it's really difficult. But yeah, I love everybody's comments about I think one of the keys to the love of God is that it's the other person is the object of attention or focus. That's what I think a lot of us are pointing to. It's that if you love someone because you're looking to get some benefit from it, then that's like a selfish love. It's not true the love of God per se. When it comes to the love of God, it's the other person is the focus of your attention and your affection and things like that. Um, and I love what the point that you made about how in 1 Corinthians 13 it describes love, but it doesn't exactly define it. Love is patient, love is kind, and you're absolutely right. The world has a patience that is, or the world has a love that is patient. The world has a love that is kind. And Jesus says that, hey, the Gentiles, they're nice to the people that are nice to them. But you, as my disciples, I'm calling you to do something even greater than that. And it's interesting. Um, Someone pointed this out that in 1 Corinthians 13, you have love described, but in 1 John 5, you have love defined. And so in 1 Corinthians 13, you have this, or love is, love is. But in 1 John, you have this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not burdensome. And so I think this ties into the point that was being made about defining good and what does it really mean for us to do things for the good of others. And this goes to the point that like where we have to, you mentioned about having to learn God's ways and be really submitted to his authority. And I think that's the part where that plays a part into the love of God. Because like John says, this is the love of God that we keep his commandments. So it's about what does he prioritize and what does he command and us following him and not just us our own ways or ideas about the world and things like that. So I thought that was really awesome. um, I have a few other points in my mind that came up. I might share a few. I know that you're an individual that appreciates data, and I also appreciate data. So just your definition works like perfectly, like awesomely for understanding what the love of God is. But even in scripture, we have sometimes the word love used to describe love that is not the love of God. So I think about like, for example, Second Samuel chapter, I have it up here, 13 where the word or it says this. Now Absalom, David's son, had a beautiful sister whose name was Tamar. And after a time, uh, Amnon loved her. So here you have a story of how one of David's sons loved his half sister. And the Bible uses the word love. So it's not me saying that he loved her, it's the Bible saying that he loved her. But yet this love led this man to abuse his half sister. And so here, love is being used not to convey the love of God per se, but a more selfish love. And it's here the word love means a desire for something or affection for something. And of course, that affection is something that can be used positively or negatively as well. So like whenever we talk about I love my kids, oftentimes we are saying I have an affection for my children. And that's a good thing. You should have an affection for your children. And so there's just a few more nuances adding to the conversation. Um, and then it's interesting too because some like I think you mentioned, and by the way, I love the fact that you didn't go this direction, where some people will say, well, agape is God's love, while phileo or any other kind of love is human love. That's not necessarily true because, like Jesus said, that the Gentiles have agape. He literally says that. So just because the Bible uses a certain word doesn't necessarily tell you what kind of love it's using in every context. Like there in 2 Samuel 13, the word love there is the same word used in Deuteronomy 6 when it says that you should love the Lord your God. But obviously, sexual abuse is not the love of God.
Mhm.
So that's just a few little more details that I'm throwing into the nuances. But yeah, I love your teaching. It was awesome, and I think your definition is spot on. And as everyone adds to the nuance, it just refines. It just refines. Um, Yeah. Anyways, thank you.
Thank you, Samuel. And yeah, this is kind of a work in progress. And so I expect that, as the Lord teaches me and as I learn from all of you, there would be an update to this at some point. But like you rightly pointed out, when we talk about, love, one of the things is the way I viewed that passage of this is the love of God is the way my mind thought of it is this is kind of when we say we love God, we express it by being obedient to his commands, right? And that brings an essential thing to which I didn't get into. When you are oriented to the good, there is a loyalty element, there is a openness element that orientation gives, which makes you want to hear from them and understand them and align with them where necessary. And particularly towards God, when we say we love God, when we're oriented towards Him, the element of vulnerability is important in love because we would listen to what he's saying and apply ourselves to what he's saying. Because sometimes love is not just about, oh, the giving. I didn't use the word giving because it is simply an expression of that orientation. But when the orientation is there, it can make us to listen and sometimes to receive. Sometimes it's not about giving, but aligning and obeying. And so, yeah. Okay. Is it Stephen Phillips or Sergio?
I'm not sure, but I guess I'll go. Um, no, thank you. There's a lot of things that came up during your teaching, and then also during the sharing afterwards. The first thing that came up for me was I just thought, you know, it's a really hard. It's always been a really hard thing to define, and I've often thought that the English word love was a bad translation of love in the Bible. And I've tried looking it up in, lexicons and dictionaries, and I've always felt like I got a little bit of clarity, but not really what I was looking for. And I thought you made a great point. It didn't give the Bible does not, at least I don't think, anyways. I think you're accurate when you said that it doesn't give a specific definition, although it gives a lot of huge clues. And I thought that you did a really good job of putting together a simple definition for what it is. I specifically like the fact that you use orienting our heart and actions, because I feel like that really encompasses. It's sometimes we think it's just your heart, it's how you feel about someone, or it's just your actions, what you do for a person, but it's not one or the other, it's both. um, the other thing that came up that I thought was really interesting, um, which I've heard teachings on this subject where they kind of pick one aspect or another, and I feel like this simple definition kind of encompassed, if not all, at least a huge portion of what has often tried to be conveyed in teachings about love, which is that, like, they'll say, oh, well, God's love is not a feeling, it's an action, or it's a choice. And I think, and then other times, kind of, you hear something like, what, you feel love for someone. But if you can orient your heart and your actions towards someone, then it makes me think, well, that's why there's kind of that confusion, because sometimes I think naturally our heart does kind of just orient, almost like a compass, just naturally you see someone suffering and your heart just naturally orients, compassion towards that person to want to help them. And other times, because of selfishness or inconvenience, or for whatever the reason is, our heart does not naturally orient itself to want to do good for that person. Or maybe they're your enemy, or maybe they're being ugly towards you, maybe they've hurt you, and so your heart does not naturally it orients away from um, the good of that person. um, But with your definition, whether our heart naturally, like a compass or like a magnet, just goes in that direction or not, we can either A, cause it to do so, or at least be cognizant enough that, no, I don't want to go in that direction. And we can pray, God, help me to orient my heart and my actions for the good of this person. Um, maybe in the moment we don't have the ability to do that. But if we can see that that's the goal, because that's the kind of the other thing that came up for me. It's like both clarity and then depending on who you're trying to love, um, it might be like, oh, that's the goal. Well, I can't do that. That, there's too much hurt or whatever the reason is that comes up. Um, so it's kind of like it clarified things, but then at the same time, in certain situations, and then look at what Jesus did with his expression of love on the cross, like Suzanne said earlier. Well, that just makes it, that's one of those things that it's almost like an impossible task. Um, but except that it's impossible, or it might feel impossible because of our limitations. But we can but if we know that that's the goal, then we can pray and go in that direction to face that challenging, seemingly impossible situation. Um, and then anyways, those are some of the big things that came up for me. Like Paul said, I definitely really like that definition. Um, it's it just I just feel like it really clarifies what the aim is when we're trying to be loving, when we're trying to have the love of God. And I like also what NT said about um, not being outcome dependent, because and you can see that in the scriptures where God says to a prophet, go speak this truth to them. In fact, he already knows, based on what he knows of the persons that he's confronting, in some situation he already knows they're not going to repent, but he still speaks the truth to them, giving them the opportunity. um, so anyways, I don't want to ramble on. I really like so much your teaching, and then the comments afterwards. So thank you so much, George.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Stephen, Phyllis, and then I have some comments, but afterwards. Yeah, Stephen, Phyllis, please go ahead.
Okay. This was just so good. So good, George. And when you talked about like love towards our love towards God and God's love towards us, and then our love towards one another, and how using that definition, it just, it just fits. It just makes sense. And one aspect that I was really thinking about is when God tells me that he loves me, do I really, really get it? I know only by the Spirit, can we even begin to glimpse that? But yet, if God is love, he's our source. He is the source of all the love. And it's very important that I be able to accept his love, that I believe his love. I can remember times with myself. I said, I know God loves me, but deep down, there was something that had me. We talked about our history and our past and our hurts, where I realized I wasn't really acutely aware of how much he loved me. And I think our acceptance of God's love is imperative so that he can love others through us. I love um, the analogy of the electricity and how it flows. That's how I see God's love. It flows. We're conduits of it. He's the source. we accept it. We've got to accept it. And then it can flow through us.
Oh, did we lose Phyllis?
Yeah, it looks like it, George.
Oh dear. Let's see if she's gonna come back. Um, she's saying really good stuff. Um, well, maybe just while before she comes back on, um, both from what Phyllis said, and there was actually one of her quotes from the past, and tying that to your point, Sergio, about, the feeling nature of love and sometimes you having to force it. Um, to me, why we sometimes notice that the feeling comes naturally and other times we have to make it come up goes back to that. Uh, Lee, yeah, that's a good point. Electricity. Um, when I look at myself, um, it starts with the disposition, the orientation of the heart to be open. And we live in a world that is, as we learned in the practicing the way, where we're influenced by sin all around us, done to us, and within us. And I feel like those are like, think of it like the wind blowing with dust. And what it does, it can make you to react when there is a lot of dust. Sometimes, oh, okay, she's back. Well, sometimes maybe you can close your windows or you can open your windows based on what's happening around. And there are times where we can be oriented towards someone, but we're not oriented towards everyone. Like we can sometimes start a day where God works in our hearts and we say, we have a clear perspective where as we go out, we're like, Lord, I want to love everyone. So the orientation of our hearts is like a blanket sense. And so as you're driving, you see someone, you don't know that person, but because you have oriented your heart to be broadly open to everyone, the feeling comes because you've already inclined towards that. And so to me, that sometimes it seems to explain why sometimes love comes as a feeling. But then there are other times where I am just pounding through life and I didn't realize that the stresses around me have made me shut up and not think about the good of others. And so when something comes up, I have to intentionally work my heart to open that orientation so that I can now respond that way, even though in that moment the stresses are making me not think or feel that way. So anyway, just a side comment. Phyllis, please go on.
I think I was pretty much done, George. It was just that, how we would describe as like Phyllis would be kind or Phyllis would, you know what? Love is kind. That's what love is. And we're conduits of God's love. He is the source. But it's imperative that we, ask the Spirit of God to show us the depth of this love. It's important that we accept that. There are many Christians even evangelizing other Christians, people, and they are not fully convinced of God's goodness towards them, his loving kindness, his forgiveness, his true forgiveness. It's important that we accept these and that we are knowledgeable. At least the Spirit will just open our eyes so that we can see the love of God. All right, I'm done. Steve had something he wanted to say. This was so good, George. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just reminded of the thing it says, the scripture says, when they love darkness rather than light. So you can love darkness and you can love light. When Adam and Eve disobeyed in the garden, they did not love, they turned their love to something else and away from God. So there is a spiritual and there's a kingdom type love, and we have to understand what that is, grow to know what that is, learn what that is. So when we have any interactions with our family, with our people that we work with or the world, that we can show them this. But then we also can show them another kind of love, a love that darkness, but it's a type of love. But we want the God kind of love. All right, that's it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, no, this is really profound in what you said. And I just keep thinking of one of the things you shared, a while back when we started practicing the way that you cannot walk yourself into being a disciple of Christ. You cannot, unintentionally become one. It is something that you have to be oriented towards. You have to make that, commitment to. And I think that if I were to parse out to the bare bones of love. It starts with that orientation, and then the execution we get clarity on as we orient. You cannot, execute when the orientation isn't there, or it would be a counterfeit, or it would be mechanical. And so and even when we orient, we need to go back and check if it's still staying oriented that way or something has subconsciously come to derail us. And when we notice that, we get back to, okay, I want to orient my heart. And it's also relevant to what you said, Steve, because there might be times where we orient ourselves to the wrong things, to the wrong desires. And that's where the Spirit of God helps us see, the orientation of your heart in this moment is not on the right thing. Or even when we say we're seeking the good, what we are interpreting as good might not be the right expression. And the Spirit of God shows us his higher way of looking at it. So, yeah, thank you, everyone. I uh, hope it was a blessing in some way and that, yeah, this is still a work in progress. And as we go into the year, may the Lord help us in our love for one another and also as we share with people around, that we would do it from this orientation of seeking their good and also in dependence with the Father to show us what that good is and how to do it effectively. So thank you everyone for listening. We welcome you to join us. You can find us on Allegiance to the King Church, a2kchurch.org. And we meet on Sundays at 7:30 a.m., which is Mountain Standard Time in the US. And you can check the conversion across the world. And we also meet on Wednesdays. We love you. God bless you. And we wish you a wonderful end of 2024.